Winter can be tough for so many reasons, and I'm not just talking about static hair that can't be tamed and shocking my cat every time I touch him after walking across the carpet in my socks. There's dry air, stuffy noses, itchy skin, and those persistent coughs and congestion. I know there are endless products out there that claim to help, but I like to stick with trusted, reliable solutions that are simple yet effective. For me, that's Vicks. And I gotta say, there's something so nostalgic about the scent of Vicks. It instantly takes me back to the comfort I felt as a kid when my mom rubbed Vicks on my chest to help me clear out when I had a cough. Vicks is the only humidifier brand that combines a cough suppressant, soothing menthol vapors, and hydrating mist to provide powerful relief from common winter discomforts like dry air, congestion, and stuffy noses. Pairing Vicks VapoPads with their humidifiers enhances that relief with the cooling sensation of menthol, while the added moisture helps soothe and ease congestion. If winter air is tough on your family, Vicks humidifiers can make a real difference. Find the Vicks Cool Relief along with VapoSteam in a variety of VapoPads on Amazon. There's a special offer on Amazon on the Vicks Cool Relief humidifier where you can get 20% off your purchase. Just go to Amazon.com and search Vicks VUL 600 Cool Relief humidifier. It has a blue tank with white in the center. Be sure to click the coupon to get the discount. You'll need this for wintertime comfort.
This is my dream, that these kids who are being excluded, that we screen them when they're 13, 14, rather than 21, and they've been in prison for the last 3 years. Let's catch them when they're first doing something wrong, when they're first excluded, when there's first kick-off in school. Screen them then, not when it's too late.
I'm Debbie Reber, and welcome to Tilt Parenting, a podcast featuring interviews and conversations aimed at inspiring, informing, and supporting parents raising differently wired kids. Today, we're diving into an often overlooked issue, the connection between ADHD, the school-to-prison pipeline, and the critical need for early intervention. My guest for this conversation is Sarah Templeton. She's an ADHD activist, counselor, and author whose personal and professional experiences have made her a passionate advocate for mandatory ADHD screenings in schools and in the criminal justice system. Sarah herself was diagnosed with ADHD, severe dyspraxia, dyscalculia, and sensory processing disorder later in life. And as a psychotherapist working with incarcerated individuals, she made this startling discovery. An overwhelming majority of inmates have ADHD that was never recognized or supported in childhood. This realization led her to create ADHD Liberty, a charity focused on increasing awareness, advocating for policy change, and ensuring early intervention for kids who might otherwise fall through the cracks. She's actually got a book coming out soon about her work in the prison system called The Prison Counselor. Sarah has written 2 books for parents. They are How to Not Murder Your ADHD Child and How Not to Damage Your ADHD Adolescent. And for teachers, she wrote Teachers, How to Not Kill the Spirit in Your ADHD Kids. So for this conversation today, Sarah will unpack for us why ADHD is so prevalent in the prison population and how mandatory screenings in schools could change the trajectory of countless lives. We discuss the role of teacher training, the need for mental health teams in schools, and the systemic barriers that prevent ADHD from being taken seriously in both education and the justice system. This is an eye-opening, informative, and powerful episode. It's really a call to action for parents, educators, and policymakers alike. I hope you find it interesting. Here is my conversation with Sarah Templeton. Hey, Sarah, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I think we're going to have a very interesting conversation. It's been almost 9 years of doing this show, and I love it when I have another fresh topic to bring to the listeners. And this is such a critical topic, actually. And so I'm really looking forward to getting into your work. But could you take a few minutes and introduce yourself? Tell us what you would want us to know about your personal why and why you do the work that you do.
Yeah, okay, with pleasure. So out of the blue, when I was 51, nearly 52, a counsellor said to me, has anybody ever suggested you're ADHD? And I said, no. Why? And she said, because I think you've got it. Go home and Google it and see what you think. And I went home that night, and it's not underestimating it to say that my entire life suddenly made sense. So I then got diagnosed. That's a bit of a story in itself. It wasn't easy, but I did get diagnosed. And then later in my 50s, I was diagnosed with severe dyspraxia, sensory processing disorder, and dyscalculia. And that really did make sense of my entire life. So at the time, I was still working in the prisons as a counsellor. I retrained to be a counsellor I started training when I was 49, qualified when I was about 54. And I had been working in the prisons as a counsellor, and I had got on phenomenally well with all these boys in the prisons. I worked in 4 prisons, and they were all either young offender institutes or adult male prisons. I didn't ever work in any female prisons. But all the boys and men I was working with, I got on with, like, I used to say it's a bit like magic. When I would sit down and talk to them, within seconds, we bonded. It was just weird, you know. I used to say it's like magic. Other counsellors I was training with would talk about it taking 3 months to build rapport with somebody. 3 months? 30 seconds with mine. It's just so instant. Anyway, then I suddenly realised when I was diagnosed, oh my God. I think all these boys have got ADHD. I think they're all the same as me. So I then started to dig deeper, and it turned out that very roughly 80% of my clients had either been diagnosed as children and weren't on medication, hence they'd ended up behind bars, or like me, they had no clue. They thought they were different. They thought there was something not bad, but different about them. They just thought they were slightly different, and they didn't really know what it was. So if we fast forward to now, I now run a charity called ADHD Liberty. And our goal is to have mandatory screening for ADHD and the coexisting conditions and autism in all schools and right the way throughout the criminal justice system. So obviously with my criminal justice system background, I'm passionate about the prisons, passionate about young offender institutes, passionate about juvenile prisons, and passionate about probation, whose job it is to stop people reoffending, and also passionate about the police, because our goal is to get all the police screening, and that's happening in the UK. We've got, I think it's just under 40 police forces now, about 38, I think it is, who are in various stages of starting to screen. So we've got some that are screening right now. We've got some that have already completed their pilots and some that are starting. But pretty much every police force in Scotland and England, not so many in Wales, but England and Scotland, are going to screen for ADHD, because the police themselves, a lot of them, are ADHD. And they are recognising in the people they're arresting, they're the same, you know. So the police are actually coming to us now, which is brilliant. I mean, all these police forces, I will say, they've approached us. We haven't approached one. They've all come to us and said, we agree with you, because I've been saying for ages, you know, the prisons are full of ADHD. This is disgusting. It's got to change. And now the police are coming to us and saying, we totally agree with you. We know that the people we're arresting are primarily ADHD, but also some autistic. And we know something's got to be done about this. So they're coming to us because I've got experience in the criminal justice system, and we've got the screeners and we've got the pilots and everything. And it's amazing because they're all coming to us. And we've had several in Australia as well, and 2 in America. And what we're finding with other countries, you know, we've got some random countries coming to us, like the ones in Africa, Southeast Asia. And they're all saying, well, our prisons are pretty much full of ADHD. What do we do? So it's a worldwide thing, this. You know, it's not just a UK thing. It's everywhere. Everybody's prisons are full of ADHD. And because I think it's largely, the reason for this is that adults weren't diagnosed with ADHD in the UK till 2009. I can't say for other countries, but, you know, it was very late that adults were accepted to have it. And up until then, pretty much everybody thought it was a childhood behavioural disorder that you outgrew in your late teens. So because of that, our prisons are still at this point rammed to the rafters with ADHD. I don't think that'll be the case in 30 or 40 years' time. I think we'll have caught up by then, and we'll realise that we need to screen people early. We need to find out if they've got any of these conditions going on, medicate the ones that can be medicated, and we will therefore stop the prisons being full of ADHD. But at the moment, because we're playing catch up everywhere in the world, the prisons are full of ADHD. And it's taken somebody like me, who's just a lowly counsellor, that's all I was, a lowly counsellor in the prisons, because I had this ADHD brain talking to all these people with ADHD, that to go, hello, this is not acceptable. This is really wrong that we're putting people in prison for their natural ADHD ways of thinking and traits and behaviours. And we're not assessing them at school or screening them young enough to keep them out of prison. 9 years I've been shouting. And it's only in the last 2.5, 3 that things have taken off.
First of all, it's just so fascinating. And I think about the progress in the past 10 years with this, and also what's been happening with the neurodiversity movement in general. We have changes happening in workplaces. We have changes happening in our schools. And this is a whole other environment that needs to be addressed. So glad that you're doing this work. I'm curious, you mentioned that police forces are requesting screeners. Can you explain, does that mean that when they arrest someone or they have people come into the system, they're saying we'd like them to be assessed for neurodivergence? Or what do you mean by that?
Well, it's voluntary. So all the police forces so far that have started, nobody's made it compulsory. I don't think that's allowed, but that people are offered a screener if they would like to. And I don't know how many police stations you've been in, but I've been in a few with some of my clients. And there's a lot of hanging around. There's a lot of boredom. There's a lot of sitting there waiting, for 2 hours for the next stage to happen. So during this hanging around in custody, in the first sort of custody suite where they go in, they're being offered an ADHD screener. Now, what we're picking up in the pilots is a lot of people are saying, I don't need to fill that in. I'm already diagnosed. Yeah. So there's a lot of saying that. Then there's another big chunk who are saying, I don't need to fill that in. I know I've got it. My mum's told me for years. Teachers have told me, girlfriends have told me, whoever's told them, but they know they've got it. So they don't need to fill the screener in. So there's two big chunks there. But the third chunk are people that do actually fill it in. And I'll give you some very bang up to date figures. Cumbria Police. Cumbria is a county very high up in England, almost bordering Scotland. So it's very, very north of the country. And it's very, very rural. Now, they are doing a pilot at the moment. They've only just completed their first month. But already of the people that aren't saying, no, I'm already diagnosed, no, I don't want to, the people that are filling it in are people that are curious, possibly, is this something happening for me? Of those, 78% are scoring very highly enough to be almost probably ADHD. So, these are not the borderline people. These are the very high scorers. That's 78%. We're saying at least 75% to be safe, at least 75% of the prison population are neurodiverse. And I think what's really scary about that is we're doing a lot of assessments into prisons now, because even on our prisons here that sort of tout themselves as being neurodiverse aware and having neurodiverse wings, all that sort of thing, fantastic. But what they can't do is screen people. They can't assess people. So we're doing assessments into prisons for ADHD. But the thing that I think most people will be quite shocked about is nearly all of those assessments are for ADHD and ASD, because a lot of people have got both. The trouble is, you probably know that, I guess this is the same in America, but I'd be fascinated to know. In England, there's a lot of empathy for autism and there's a lot of disdain for ADHD. The people who don't know much, they will say, oh, ADHD, just calm down, sit down, behave yourself, learn to act like the other children. It's just a bit of a naughty, for goodness sake, control yourself type condition. Whereas when you talk about autism, it's all that we should take that very seriously. That's a very serious issue, very seriously. So when we're talking about the amount of ADHD in prisons, when people are getting a bit sort of scoffy about that, I'm like, well, do you know that most of them also got autism? And then people are really like, whoa, really? So we're locking up people with, yes, we are. We're locking up people with autism and ADHD. So I guess you just call it neurodivergence, but there's a lot of it in prisons, way, way more than there is in the general public.
Yeah. I appreciate the way you mentioned that there's more empathy towards autism and more disdain towards ADHD. I agree. I think it is the same here. I think it is one of the more or most maligned, perhaps, forms of neurodivergence. And there's still a lot of myths about whether or not it's a real thing. And so it is really complicated. What I'd love to do is take a break right now. And then when we come back, I'd love to get into why specifically ADHD is so prevalent in the prison population. So we'll do that after this. I am really interested in figuring out how to make the best choices to optimize my health, especially when it comes to my workouts, sleep, and of course, my nutrition. And I've learned that when your metabolism is functioning properly, you feel the benefits in literally every aspect of your life, because metabolism is essentially your body's engine. It's how your body converts food into fuel to keep you going. And that's why I'm really excited about Lumen, the world's first handheld metabolic coach. It's a device that measures your metabolism through your breath, and through the app provides tailored guidance to improve your nutrition, your workouts, your sleep, even stress management. based on whatever's happening with your metabolism that day. You can also breathe into it before and after workouts and meals to get real-time insights into what exactly is going on in your body. Also, if you're dealing with hormonal changes and fluctuations like I am, Lumen can track your cycle and the onset of menopause, adjusting its recommendations to support a healthy metabolism throughout those hormonal shifts. This helps maintain energy levels and curb cravings. I'm kind of geeking out about having access to this kind of data. I find it so fascinating. Take the next step to improving your health. Go to lumen.me/tilt to get 20% off your Lumen. That's lumen.me/tilt for 20% off your purchase. And thank you, Lumen, for sponsoring this episode. This episode is sponsored by Able Now, tax advantage savings accounts for eligible individuals with disabilities. If you're a parent, you know how important it is to plan for your child's future. But if your child has a disability, saving money can feel complicated, especially when you're trying to protect their eligibility for certain benefits like Medicaid. That's where Able Now comes in. Able Now accounts offer a tax-advantaged way to save for your child's future needs without jeopardizing eligibility for those critical disability services and supports. Funds in your account can be used for a wide range of expenses, everything from education to healthcare, housing, transportation, and even basic living expenses. Able Now accounts are available to qualified individuals in all 50 states. Are you eligible? Visit ablenow.com to learn how you can start saving today and join thousands of families using Able Now to secure a brighter future for their loved ones. While my husband isn't necessarily a big fan of Mondays, one highlight of the day is the sound of the buzzer announcing our Factor delivery for the week. Darren loves opening up the box and checking out the meals we've got lined up. It's become a little ritual in our house. Factor meals are chef-crafted, gourmet, and ready to heat and eat in just 2 minutes. They're dietitian approved, fresh, and thoughtfully designed to make eating well super easy. Factor has truly been a game changer for our family. It takes the stress out of meal planning and gives us time back in our week. Here's how it works. Factor arrives fully prepared, and every week you can choose from 40 different meal options tailored to 8 dietary preferences like protein plus or vegan or keto. Darren loves the calorie smart meals because they're both delicious and help him stay on track with his nutritional goals. We have a few favorite go-tos that we often reorder, but we also like to mix things up and try something new. This week's standout, grilled chicken with potato and leek puree. So good. Depending on our week, we sometimes add extras like smoothies or grab-and-go snacks or juices. It's so convenient to have these little options ready whenever we need them. Eat smart with Factor. Get started at factormeals.com/tilt50off. And use code TILT50OFF to get 50% off your first box plus free shipping. That's code TILT50OFF at factormeals.com/tilt50off to get 50% off plus free shipping on your first box. Just to back up, I had read in research that there's much higher prevalence of learning disabilities and dyslexia, but this information about ADHD specifically, I did not know, and it completely does not surprise me. But I'd love to hear from your experience. What are the aspects of the ADHD brain that make it much more likely, perhaps? I don't know if that's even the right word.
How many traits would you like? The first one is high propensity to boredom. The amount of people I've worked in prison, when I've asked them why they've done something, they've gone, oh, I was just so bored. I just had to do something. So high propensity to boredom. The need to get out and do something. So people will get out and they will go on building sites. They will do things they shouldn't do because they need to get out and do something. Risk-taking and thrill-seeking massively comes into it. The need for adrenaline massively comes into it. Always thinking they know best. Wanting everything now, that comes into it, that trait. Because I've met numerous young sort of teenagers, young offenders, who have started drug dealing or stealing because they could not wait for the next pair of trainers. They could not wait for the next designer tracksuit. They just can't wait. They need it now. So because they need it now, that entices them down the wrong road. Also, a massive trait of ADHD that gets people put behind bars is not thinking of the consequences. I didn't realise that I hadn't thought of the consequences until I took stimulant ADHD medication when I was 55. And I suddenly, for the first time, thought of a consequence. And it's when you suddenly, for the first time, think of a consequence, you think, good grief, have I not been thinking of consequences for 55 years? And I hadn't. I'll give you one specific case. One boy I was working with was in prison for stealing his 1,000th car. And I said to him, when you were stealing your 1,000th car, did you think that if you did, maybe you'd end up in here? Did that thought come into your mind or not? And he thought about it and he said, to be honest, Sarah, he said, no. He said, I was walking down the road and I tried the door handle like you always do. And then he looked at me and he said, I opened, and he said, and the keys were in the ignition. What else was I to do? Yeah, that was as far as his thinking went. The keys were in the ignition. Good to go. And he really thought about whether that might end up with him back in prison. Hadn't entered his head. Not at all. So not thinking of the consequences and impulsivity, doing things without thinking, just, whoa, that purse looks ready to be stolen. That handbag looks like it might have money in it. Just impulsivity and not thinking of the consequences are two huge reasons. But there's so many. And when you talk to these boys in prison, it's heartbreaking because the reason for their offending, it's either been any of that I've just spoken about, or it's feeding addiction. So they've been self-medicating their addiction, either with alcohol, drugs, whatever, and they've had to steal to feed that. So one particular offender, for example, who's a trustee of my charity and does not mind his story being shared, all his crime, he'd been in prison 15 times by the age of 29, but all his crimes were around him self-medicating his ADHD. We got him diagnosed when he was 29. But he said every crime was either stealing alcohol, being drunk and disorderly on alcohol, fighting, a fray when he was drunk, or ABH or GBH when he was punching because he was drunk. So every single crime, and he'd been arrested 500 times and convicted 53 times, till I got hold of him and said, you think you're ADHD? Get in to see this psychiatrist who diagnosed him with very severe ADHD. He said, it's the most severe ADHD I've ever seen. But that's why that boy was self-medicating and ended up in prison 15 times, costing us a fortune. We're trying to get our government to realise that for each person in prison, it's £48,000. Yeah. To get somebody screened, assessed, diagnosed and medicated, even if we're giving them free prescriptions, it's about £1,000 a year. Now, if you imagine 8 or 9 out of 10 in prison are ADHD, how much is that going to save? It's going to save us colossal amounts of money. And also our government are obsessed at the moment with building new prisons, getting more places in prison. We don't need more places in prison. What we need are mental health teams in prisons who can assess and diagnose the condition that most of them have got. So that's why we're campaigning, because we want screening to be mandatory.
So in terms of the work that you're doing, because I could imagine it must be frustrating, right? Because these offenders, these people who are in prison now, are there in many ways because this was not identified earlier. They didn't have the supports they need. And now they have this information. And I'm just wondering, how is that for you? Do you feel like, gosh, this is too late for this person, but I'm working more to prevent the younger generation?
No, I never think it's too late because, I've worked with people who are 60 and just finding out their ADHD. It's never too late to get diagnosed, never. And this is why, much as we're very passionate about catching young people early, and I'll give you an example of something in a minute, but we want to catch the whole lot. People that have been in prison on 20, 30-year life sentences, if there's a reason for it, they deserve to know as much as anybody else. But something very interesting, we were approached about literally 3 weeks ago, so this is very new, and I only went to visit them 3 days ago, so it's very, very new. We've been approached by an approved school. Now, I don't know what they're called in America, but here, approved schools are where kids who've been excluded from mainstream school are sent. Yeah. So they have various names, but they usually go by the word approved school in the UK. Now, the manager of this particular approved school in Nottinghamshire in England, he had just had his oldest daughter. He's had 5 children. He just had his oldest daughter diagnosed with ADHD, and she's on the ASD waiting list as well. But it was when reading and filling in forms for her and reading all about the ADHD traits that he not only realised he and his wife, who run this school, are both ADHD. So are all the 7 teachers. But much more scary than that, I mean, that's scary enough, but more scary than that, he has 30 students currently. That does include girls, a small ratio of girls, primarily boys. But the whole staff team, when I met them, now believe that all 30 of those children are ADHD. And it's horrified them. And I've had to say to them, Don't feel bad. It's great that you've had this awareness because your own daughter has been diagnosed and now you've suddenly realised. Don't be horrified, don't be sort of beat yourself up for not realising before. But it's now we've realised this and now we're going to screen all 30 of those children. What they have already said is, we don't want this to stop here. We need to spread this information out across all the other approved schools in the UK. And I said, be my guest. This is my dream. This is my dream that these kids who are being excluded, that we screen them when they're 13, 14, rather than 21, and they've been in prison for the last 3 years. Let's catch them when they're first doing something wrong, when they're first excluded, when there's first kick off in school. Screen them then, not when it's too late. So we are now going to start to do that with approved schools, which is huge for us because we are massively, massively passionate about stopping the school to prison pipeline. The prisons are full of ADHD. So when you roll it back, where does it start from? It starts when kids are not understood at school. I wasn't diagnosed with dyscalculia until I was 55. That's disgusting. I should have been assessed at 12 when I failed my grammar school entrance because the test was problems and dyscalculia brains can't work out problems. At 12, it was highlighted in as much as everybody appealed for me and said, you should be at the grammar school, you should be, what's gone wrong. But they couldn't put me through because I'd failed it so spectacularly. That was in 1975. And what I always say is that wouldn't it be lovely to say that's not the case anymore and all these kids are getting screened and getting the right diagnosis and that's not happening. But it's exactly the same now. Nothing's changed since I was 12 and I'm now 61. It's about time it changed. So this is my vocation now. I just spend my entire life trying to get people to recognise that this is a proper condition. It has severe impacts, especially when it's not diagnosed and medicated. And if you don't want your prisons to be full of people with ADHD and autism, we've got to change the way we do things. It's quite simple.
Let's take a quick break. And I want to talk a little bit more about what is happening in schools where we can really have an impact on stopping this problem. If you've been listening to this show for a while, you know that our family recently made a big international move from New York back to the Netherlands. It's been so nice to have a few steady constants in our lives, like our subscription to Green Chef. Green Chef is a meal delivery service that brings pre-measured and prepped ingredients straight to your door. Every box is packed with wholesome, clean foods like fresh fruits and vegetables, lean proteins, and whole grains, making it super easy to focus on healthy eating. Green Chef takes the stress out of meal planning, which I so appreciate, and their recipes are curated for a variety of lifestyles and dietary needs. They've even introduced a new Green Chef Reset collection for a limited time. It features dietitian-approved recipes that include fiber support, are lower in saturated fat, and are under 700 calories per serving. I appreciate this extra support for a reset after the holidays, in which many of my healthy eating habits got a bit off track. They also have quick and easy salads, ready-to-blend smoothies, and grab-and-go protein-packed breakfasts. Also, fun fact, Green Chef is owned by HelloFresh, so you get even more meal plan options with the convenience of both brands. I love switching between the two, and now my listeners can enjoy a discount on both brands with me. Thrive all year with clean, easy meals from Green Chef. Go to greenchef.com/tiltfree and use code TILTFREE to get started with free salads for 2 months plus 50% off your first box.
My dad works in B2B marketing. He came by my school for career day and said he was a big ROAS man. Then he told everyone how much he loved calculating his return on ad spend. My friends still laugh at me to this day.
Not everyone gets B2B, but with LinkedIn, you'll be able to reach people who do. Get a $100 credit on your next ad campaign. Go to linkedin.com/results to claim your credit. That's linkedin.com/results. Terms and conditions apply. LinkedIn, the place to be, to be.
Business taxes. We're stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on turbotax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
Okay, we've used the term school to prison pipeline. We spent a lot of this conversation talking about the current adult or young adult prison population, but let's go back when, assuming these are kids who are in traditional schools before they're sent to an approved school. Tell me about some of the school policies that are really exacerbating the struggles of these kids that lead them to go down this road. And as part of that, what we can do differently.
Yeah. Teacher training. ADHD and autism and all the coexisting conditions need to be included in teacher training. We always say this is not teachers' fault. Teachers on the whole are absolutely desperate for this information. They genuinely want to help. They genuinely don't know how to help, and nobody's told them. So it needs to be included in teacher training worldwide. Every teacher needs to know about autism, ADHD, all the coexisting conditions and how they co-occur. They need that training. I think it's very unfair at the moment because we're putting teachers into a class. There's likely to be 2 or 3 ADHD people in that class and 1 or 2 people with autism. And we're giving them, at best in this country, we've heard that they get a week's training. Now that's at best. That's out of a 3-year degree. More often in this country, they will have either 3 hours training out of 3 years on neurodiversity or none. And then we throw them into a classroom and we expect them to manage neurodiversity and neurotypicals. It's very unfair on the teachers. Most of the teachers we train are absolutely lovely and desperate for this information. I've written 3 books so far on ADHD, and one of them is for teachers. And it's very much says in there, this is no criticism or judgment of you. We know you are good people. You've gone into this, not for the money. You've gone into this because you care about children. You want the best for them. And nobody's given you the right tools. So here's some tools that will help you. But at the moment, in the UK at least, we seem to be going backwards. So we are punishing children for more things. I know of schools now that have put in policies of no talking in the corridors, no talking in the classroom. One child recently got a detention for asking the other child what the date was. So he asked a girl or boy, I can't remember, what sitting next to him, what was the date, because he'd forgotten it, because people with ADHD, we have poor short-term memory, so we often don't know what day it is or what date it is. And he got a detention because he didn't know what the date was. Now, that's wrong, in my view. But there are some schools that are clamping down and punishing ADHD kids and neurotypicals, really, but more, with ADHD, you're more likely to do this sort of stuff. So if you put your head in your hands, that's punishable. You have to put your both hands on the table. It's getting draconian. It really is getting bad. And of course, it's the ADHD kids that find it hardest. There's another thing. You have to be looking at the teacher for the whole of the lesson in some schools now. Now, an ADHD kid is going to find that very hard. They are going to get distracted. They are going to dream, go into another world at times. But they can be punished for that. And they can get detentions. And if they get enough detentions, they can eventually get excluded. So, we are definitely excluding ADHD kids. And that approved school that I was in literally 3 days ago is the best example. They think all 30 of their students are ADHD, and probably a ton of coexisting conditions amongst those as well. Because something that also impacts why kids get into trouble at school and then end up in the school to prison pipeline is rejection sensitive dysphoria. So because we don't want to be rejected and we don't want to be humiliated, if you've got a child with undiagnosed dyscalculia, dyslexia, dysgraphia, they don't want to be humiliated. They don't want to say, Miss, I can't do this. So rather than, Miss, I can't do this, and have 29 children laughing at you, they will just skip the class. They will just go somewhere where it's not going to be embarrassing, not going to be humiliated. So the humiliation thing comes into it a lot because we're expecting children to all behave the same and have the same amount of skills and be equally good at everything. That is not taking into account the ones with dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia. It's not taking them into account. And we need to. We need to. Everywhere. That needs to change. So what we want in this country, and we're pushing very hard for it, is mandatory screening in schools from the age of 5 and at every transition. So, 7, 11, 15, 18. It takes 5 minutes and it doesn't cost anything. It's a paper exercise. It really doesn't cost to do the screening. Yes, the bit after that might cost, but the screening costs nothing to flag up these conditions. So we want mandatory screening in education and mandatory screening in the criminal justice system. And that includes police, probation, prisons, or right the way through, because then we will pick up people at the earliest possible moment that we can.
What kind of resistance or barriers have you encountered to doing this work? Like even in the school systems, do you find that parents are behind this? Are there some common forces of resistance that you are finding yourself coming up against?
There's a few. They're very, very minor, I will say. They're not the overpowering voice. The overpowering voice is, thank God, there's a reason for this and let's do something about it. That's the biggest voice. There are some parents who don't want ADHD in the family and they think if they ignore it, it'll go away. There are some parents who don't want their kids labelled. They see it as a label. And it infuriates me that ADHD is the only one condition that they ever use the word label about. They wouldn't say that if a child had epilepsy or a child was diabetic or a child had cancer. They would say, I don't want the label. But they'll say it about ADHD. So you do get that. They don't want the naughty label. And then mostly that comes from, I always say, sort of genuine ignorance of the fact that the condition is not just naughty boy behaviour. It goes a hell of a lot further than that. Once these parents understand that, and they understand you can't just ignore it and it will go away. If you don't get it diagnosed and pretend it's not there, it won't go away. It will actually come out and bite you on the bum much harder when it does erupt, at some point. So those parents, they need gentle introduction to it. I always say, just read my books. It's all in my books, how serious it is. How I was not a naughty child. I never skipped school. I never smoked. I'm not your archetypal naughty child. But am I diagnosed moderate to severe ADHD? Yes, I am. This sort of opens the doors for people who are negative about it by saying, do I look like a naughty boy who's chucking a chair at a teacher? No. I was diagnosed at 51 when I was a married business owner, property owner, but still moderate to severe ADHD. So it's a genuine ignorance, I think, when parents come back with that sort of stuff. And also they don't want the label. The other ignorance we've got is our government, who think that everything's going fabulously when it comes to ADHD in the prisons because they've put a neurodiversity manager in each prison and they think that means that everything's going well. Well, it's really not going well, because if it was going well, we wouldn't be having to arrange private assessments into prisons every single week, which is what we're doing. There are young offenders who take their own lives because they don't take the ADHD seriously and they have very, very dysregulated emotions, and then they take their own lives. And I speak from personal experience. One of my young offenders from Aylesbury took his own life when they refused to put him on ADHD medications in 2 prisons. And despite my safeguarding risk letters, they ignored it. I actually met some of these officers at the inquest, and not one of them knew anything about adult ADHD. They did not know how serious a condition it was. And I suddenly realised, oh my God, this is not an individual officer's or an individual prison's problem. This is a systemic problem. People do not take this condition seriously, and they don't realise how serious it can be when it's not medicated. It can be great and it can be wonderful and it can give you drive and enthusiasm and clown of the class and all those wonderful things, but it comes with underlying issues. And until you've got it identified and medicated, you are not safe from those issues.
I just really appreciate your passion and enthusiasm. I just love seeing people light up about the work that they're doing. That's so important. And the fact that you've identified this huge need and you're in a position to impact change and be part of that paradigm shift is just really exciting to me. So I just want to say thank you for everything you shared. And would you just, before we say goodbye, you have written other books, some of which are for parents. So can you just mention those? And listeners, I'll include links in the show notes if you want to check them out. But could you take a moment to tell us about them?
Okay, the first one that already sells quite well in America, actually, is called How Not to Murder Your ADHD Kid. Instead, learn to be a child's own ADHD coach. I always say that's ideal. It's ideal really for children of any age, but particularly young. So particularly up to the age of about 11. But then what I've done is I've written a second one for parents of teenagers, because teenagers, I worked with loads and loads of fabulous ADHD teenage clients when I was a counsellor. I adored them all. That one is called How Not to Damage Your ADHD Adolescent. If your parents are choosing between one or the other, if your child is 12 and above, get the teenage book, because there's a lot more in there that's very relevant for teenagers. And for younger kids, definitely the first one, it covers everything, but the teenage one's got extra things in about the teenage years. My next book coming out is called The Prison Counsellor. It's coming out in April. It's written, it's done, it's just being edited now. But the book is all about the staggering amount of ADHD I found in the prisons before I was even diagnosed, and then when I was diagnosed. So if anybody wants to read more, just wait for that book, because it's all in there. The whole thing is absolutely rammed with kids who were diagnosed and then taken off the meds, or were told they'd outgrown it, and then they all end up in prison. And then the other half don't know they've got ADHD, but they have. Pretty much every client I work with was in some stage of either getting diagnosed or had been diagnosed and taken off the meds. There was ADHD in the mix with all of them, but they were at different stages of it. I have poured my heart and soul into this book because I want this book to be the one that changes things for good. It needs to. If you have a look at the reviews on Amazon from the parents and from other websites, this is the nicest thing about it. I always say, yes, money's nice, but it's not the end of the world. What is wonderful when I read these reviews is that parents say they've read one or other of my books and it's changed everything at home. Some parents say, oh, I've not been talking to my daughter for the last 5 years. I've read your book. Now everything's back to normal. that gives me the most incredible buzz, that I'm helping families relate better to their kids and understand their kids. Because as soon as you have got somebody with ADHD who's understood and accepted for the way they are, and people stop trying to beat the ADHD out of them, not physically, but, actually beat it out of them, your ADHD child will be transformed because somebody understands how they operate and how their brain works. So it's all about just understanding them. And from understanding them, that stops them kicking off and all the things that follow and end up in the school to prison pipeline. So understanding is the key word.
Wonderful. Well, Sarah, I just want to say thank you again for everything you shared. And I'm just so happy to have been connected with you and to learn about your work. I'll definitely follow what you're doing with curiosity and kind of seeing the impact trickle out around the world. And we'll keep an eye on your new book when it comes out. And yeah, thank you so much.
My great pleasure. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to the Tilt Parenting Podcast. To learn more about today's guest and the resources we talked about, check out the extensive show notes page on Tilt Parenting. There you'll find key takeaways, links to all the resources mentioned, and even a full transcript of our conversation. Just go to tiltparenting.com/podcast and select this episode. If you're looking for personal support from me and connection with the phenomenal community of parents raising neurodivergent kids, join us in the recently rebooted Differently Wired Club. The new Differently Wired Club can help you cultivate the positive shifts you're hoping for. Go to tiltparenting.com/club to learn more. The Tilt Parenting Podcast is hosted by me, Debbie Reber, author of Differently Wired and the founder of Tilt Parenting, and was edited by Andrea Curtis Amasquita. To support this show, please join my Patreon campaign where you can set up a small monthly contribution. Just go to patreon.com/tiltparenting to learn more. If you want to follow Tilt on social media, you can find us at Tilt Parenting on Instagram and Facebook. And lastly, please take a minute to leave a 5-star rating or review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to podcasts. That helps this show stay visible so others can find it more easily. And that's all for this week. Stay safe, stay well, and take good care. And for more information about any of the parenting resources Tilt offers, visit tiltparenting.com.